Welcome back to the Deep Dive, and a very warm welcome back to everyone here on the Baha'i Reflections channel. If you're joining us, you already know what we do here. We try to provide that shortcut to being really well-informed. We take what can be complex, sometimes pretty dense, but always crucial source material, letters, reports, and we try to pull out the key insights you need to understand what's happening, not just in the world, but within the global Baha'i community.
And today, we are diving into a single, really focused document. Our source is the latest letter from the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. Specifically, it's the letter for the Feast of Masá'il, and it's dated December 11, 2025.
Right, and that timing is so important. The Feast of Masá'il, it's always been this time for reflection, for asking questions, right? You know, thinking about the divine will and how things are going to unfold. But what I find so compelling about this letter is how it pivots. It sort of moves away from that abstract mystery. And instead, it gives us this incredibly detailed field report. It contains some really concrete answers to that question we're always asking. How do we actually build community?
It's not a general reflection.
No.
It's a strategic analysis, and it's designed to inform and really inspire the efforts that are connected to the 9-year plan.
That's the key distinction, isn't it?
It is. What's so fascinating is that the NSA isn't just, issuing a new set of instructions from on high. They are sharing a successful blueprint. They're giving us a concrete, replicable example of community transformation, and it's drawn directly from real, on-the-ground experience.
So they're shifting the focus.
Completely. From talking about these abstract goals, like releasing the society-building power of the faith, to actually showing us what that power looks like in action, lived out in the small details of one specific neighborhood. It's practical, it's inspiring, and honestly, it tells us a lot about the maturity of the whole Institute process.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to analyze this case study, this example from an advanced cluster in British Columbia. We'll look at the mechanisms of its success, the strategic pivots they made, and what this report tells us about the future of the 9-year plan. Our mission today is to understand not just what happened, but why this particular sequence of events is being held up as a model for, well, the entire North American community.
So to start, I think we really need to set the institutional context. The letter opens by explaining the environment where this insight came from, and that's just as important as the insight itself.
Okay, absolutely. Let me read that first segment, which details the gathering that led to this report. It says, "Dearly loved friends, in late October, several members of the National Spiritual Assembly had the wonderful opportunity to attend a gathering organized by the Board of Counselors to reflect with friends from some of the most advanced clusters in North America. These included clusters in Canada, as well as the United States, and the consultations were notable for the insights they provided about the ways in which the society-building power of the faith is being released in ever greater measures, especially where receptive populations have taken real ownership of the Institute process."
Okay, so that opening paragraph right there is, it's just dense with strategic meaning. The first thing to notice is the structure of that meeting. This is not your typical top-down administrative gathering.
Not at all.
You have NSA members, you have the Board of Counselors, and then you have representatives, the grassroots activists, the pioneers, the people who are actually driving the success from the most advanced clusters across both the U.S. and Canada.
So you've got two different learning dimensions happening at once. You've got the vertical learning, the institutions like the NSA and the counselors who are observing and supporting. But maybe more importantly, you have this horizontal learning where friends from different advanced clusters are consulting directly with each other.
Precisely. The goal here isn't to hand down instructions. The letter says it's to reflect and to learn from the people who are succeeding on the cutting edge of applying the framework for action.
And the language is so specific. The whole point was to gain insights about the ways in which the society-building power of the faith is being released. Before we even get to the case study, we have to talk about that term, advanced clusters. What does that actually imply? Because I think for a lot of people listening, they might just assume it means the biggest clusters.
And that is such a crucial distinction to make. In the context of the 9-year plan, an advanced cluster isn't defined just by, population size or even the number of registered Baha'is. It's defined by the degree to which they are actually releasing that society-building power.
So it's about measurable progress.
It's about measurable progress in transforming the social life of a neighborhood. It means the core activities, your children's classes, junior youth groups, devotionals, study circles, they're all working together as a cohesive system. They're generating capacity from within, and they're consistently reaching a receptive population.
In other words, they're successfully turning spiritual principles into a social reality.
Yeah.
The difference then between just a consolidated cluster and an advanced one is that shift from individual actions to this collective, sustained community action that actually has an influence on the wider neighborhood.
Exactly. It's about the quality of the interaction and the coherence of the system, not just the raw numbers. And this consultation, it's really about refining those methods and figuring out how to scale that success. The whole reason you bring these high achievers together is to capture these insights, these replicable patterns of success, and then spread them widely. It directly addresses the goals of previous plans, which, laid the groundwork. Now the big question is how to make that success sustainable and widespread.
That makes their choice of case study even more telling then. The letter says they chose to share an abridged report of one notable example from a cluster in British Columbia. So this wasn't the only success story, but you have to assume it was the one that provided the clearest, most instructive, and maybe the most universally replicable blueprint.
I think so. They're essentially giving us the model answer.
Yeah.
It demonstrates a sequence where all these positive things, diversity, family ownership, the institutions being responsive, and then that exponential growth, it all came together perfectly.
Okay, let's shift to that specific case study. The focus is on the Edmonds neighborhood, which is described as a vibrant and diverse area in the Vancouver cluster. And this is where it gets really interesting for me because the language they use immediately points to a fundamental shift in mindset.
It really does. The report gets to the core success factor right in its opening lines about the neighborhood.
Let me read it. It says, in the Edmonds neighborhood, a vibrant and diverse area within the Vancouver cluster, the Friends have been learning what it means for groups of families to become protagonists in the spiritual and social transformation of their community. Over the years, this neighborhood has seen a steady increase in participation in the institute process through the efforts of families, especially mothers.
Okay, that first sentence. It introduces the foundational concept we absolutely have to explore. Families becoming protagonists.
Yes.
That term protagonist, it's not just casual language. It's a very specific, almost technical term in the planning language of the faith. And seeing it emerge in a successful cluster is the whole key.
So let's drill down on that. For anyone listening, what is the actual difference between being a participant in a program and being a protagonist in this context?
It's a huge difference. A participant is someone who, attends a class or benefits from a program. They might contribute time when they're asked. They're a beneficiary, maybe a supporter. But a protagonist is someone who steps into the active initiating role. They become the driving force.
So they're not waiting for the core team or the pioneer to tell them what to do next.
Not at all. They identify a need themselves. They consult with others. They mobilize resources. And they take ownership of the spiritual and social transformation for themselves.
It's a shift from receiving capacity to generating it.
That's a perfect way to put it. It means the source of energy and initiative has become internal to the community itself. It no longer depends on, external structures or a couple of pioneers.
And that's absolutely vital for sustainability, isn't it?
Oh, completely. If the success of a cluster depends on a small team of pioneers, the whole process is vulnerable. But if it depends on local families, the homeowners, the parents, the actual neighbors becoming protagonists, then the process is resilient, it's deeply rooted, and it can actually scale.
It guarantees the effort is truly local.
And responsive to that community's specific needs, yes.
I really appreciate that point on sustainability. But the letter also makes a point of highlighting the makeup of these families. It says this happened in a vibrant and diverse area with people from Chinese, Indian, Colombian, and Mexican backgrounds. This is not some simple, homogenous community building on social ties that were already there.
And that diversity is a critical part of the lesson. The success is rooted in the fact that all these different backgrounds, different languages, cultures, migration stories, they all found unity in action through a shared spiritual goal. The Institute process, because it focuses on universal spiritual principles and practical service, it becomes the ultimate unifier.
It proves that unity isn't about cultural uniformity.
It's a common dedication to service that just transcends all those differences.
This also speaks to a common challenge in any kind of community building, which is how do you get people from wildly different backgrounds to trust each other enough to work together? And what the report implies is that their shared commitment to their children's spiritual education was just stronger than any cultural or linguistic barrier.
It absolutely was.
Wow.
And this brings us to the initial entry point, which was, frankly, brilliant in its pragmatism. They began to find a sense of belonging and purpose through a shared concern for their children's education.
That is such a universal human aspiration. It's not abstract theology, it's a concrete day-to-day need. If you're a parent, especially in a new or really diverse environment like Edmonds, your number one concern is making sure your kids have good character, supportive friends, a foundation for success.
And that shared concern was the perfect starting point. It's the common denominator that cuts across economic or cultural status. By focusing the initial effort on character development and the junior youth program, the whole spiritual process became immediately relevant to their everyday lives. They weren't necessarily looking for the Baha'i faith, they were looking for character education for their kids.
Right, and the report says at the time the focus of the nucleus was mainly on the junior youth program, but the families they were meeting had younger children, and they were the ones who expressed this desire for age-appropriate programs.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of the 9-year plan, this is a textbook example of finding and then responding to a receptive population. A receptive population isn't just a group that's open to new ideas. It's a population where the core activities of the Institute process spiritual education resonate immediately and powerfully with the community's own existing aspirations.
When the activity solves an immediate problem for the family, the process just takes off on its own.
It gets authentic internal momentum. The community sees the value right away.
And the initiative to respond came from a protagonist. The letter says, out of a children's festival and the initiative of a mother, herself a member of the nucleus who began conversations with other parents in her child's school, a children's class was formed.
That single initiative, it shows the whole mechanism of protagonist power. The institution provides the framework, the materials. But that local mother, she provided the initiative, the trust network, the other parents from her kid's school, and the personal relationships you need to bridge that gap.
That's the definition of scaling through empowerment. So the catalyst was set, which leads us to these critical strategic pivots in the report. The program wasn't static. It evolved immediately based on what they were seeing and hearing, which says a lot about the tutors and teachers involved.
It does. The letter details this evolution. It says, many of the mothers who brought their children to the class stayed at the neighborhood center until the class finished. The team of tutors and teachers began to think about how to engage them meaningfully. When the mothers themselves expressed a desire to learn English, the team responded to this need.
Okay, this is the first critical pivot, and it's just such a lesson in sensitivity and adaptation. The mothers are already there. They're physically present, engaged because of their children. The team didn't just, wait for the next formal institute campaign to start. They looked at the environment and responded directly to a material expressed need, learning English.
It really demonstrates the adaptability that the faith encourages, right? The spiritual framework has to meet people where they actually are.
And we have to emphasize the role of the mothers here.
Absolutely. The success of this cluster is explicitly tied to families, and the report says especially mothers. They were the initial catalysts for the children's classes, and now they're the catalysts for their own development by saying, hey, we need to learn English.
In so many cultures, engaging the mothers is the fastest way to accelerate change in the home.
They're often the primary educators, the nurturers. When their capacity grows, the whole family's capacity grows.
But I have to stop you there because I have a practical question. Setting up an English class is one thing. Integrating it with a structured spiritual curriculum is something else entirely. How did they bridge that gap without making the mothers feel like they were just being, funneled into a religious agenda when what they really wanted was practical English skills?
And that is where the truly genius move comes in. It's this beautiful blending of the English class with the established framework of the Institute. The team managed it by treating the English class as the vehicle and the Institute curriculum as the content. And crucially, they chose content that directly validated the mother's existing role as parents.
Okay, let's read that specific part, because this is the core aha moment of the entire report for me.
It is. The letter says, during the English class, the conversations among them naturally turned to the needs and development of their children. Responding to this development, they were invited to study Ruhi Book 3, Teaching Children's Classes. And then it says, the tutor recognized that while the mothers might not all go on to teach children's classes, the materials could still help them reflect on their role as parents and deepen their understanding of spiritual education, nurture spiritual qualities at home, and address common challenges while continuing to develop their English skills.
That is brilliant. Just brilliant strategic planning. But wait, let me probe this a bit. Ruhi Book 3 is titled Teaching Children's Classes. For someone coming in just wanting to learn English, wouldn't there be a potential mismatch? Why choose a book that's nominally about teaching when all they wanted was to be better parents and learn English? Why not just a book about virtues?
That question gets right to the strategic heart of it. They didn't choose a generalized parenting book because Book 3 is focused on the practical application of spiritual education. It's about how to articulate virtues, how to manage a classroom or a living room based on spiritual principles, how to create a climate of loving discipline.
So the team saw that the methods and insights in Book 3 are inherently about fostering spiritual capacity and addressing character, which is exactly what the mothers were already worried about: bullying, discipline, being kind.
Exactly. The purpose of the study wasn't to get a formal certificate as a teacher. It was about using the systematic reflection that's built into the Book 3 curriculum to build their spiritual capacity and tackle real-world parenting challenges.
So they got a dual purpose.
A perfect dual purpose. They kept developing their English skills because the study itself was in English, with structured vocabulary for the materials, and at the same time they were invited to reflect systematically on the spiritual side of their most important role.
It's a seamless integration of a material need, English, with a social and spiritual need, which is parenting capacity. It really proves how adaptive and utilitarian the Institute process can be. It's not this rigid system. It's a framework you can apply creatively to almost any need.
And it speaks to the intrinsic value of the Institute materials themselves. If they had just offered a standard English class, okay, they might have solved the language need, but they would have missed this huge opportunity for deep spiritual capacity building. By choosing Book 3, they gave them a structured method: the study, action, reflection cycle, which is the real engine of transformation.
This raises a bigger question, though. What does this tell us about the broader purpose of the Institute materials? If Book 3 can be repurposed so effectively for general parenting, does that mean the whole curriculum is really about capacity building, regardless of the official role it prepares you for?
I think it does. I think the materials are structured for capacity building and spiritual investigation. Whether you apply Book 3 as a formal teacher in a class of 30, or as a mother working one-on-one with your own 2 kids at home, the outcome is the same. The systematic study of a spiritual concept leads you to reflect on how to apply it, and that builds your spiritual muscle. It's a process for increasing consciousness.
It's the framework, not the title of the book, that really matters.
Exactly.
All right.
And that systematic framework leads directly into the transformation cycle they describe next.
Right. So now we see the system really take hold. This next part of the report details how these 7 core mothers began their consistent weekly spiritual practice, which, as you said, became the engine of change. The letter lays out the structure. Each week, while their children attended a class, 7 mothers gathered to study a spiritual quality and discuss how to cultivate it within their families. At the beginning of every session, they shared their reflections from the week and discussed challenges. Through this process of study, action, and reflection, the mothers became increasingly conscious of the changes occurring and new capacities developing in their children.
Let's just pause there and really emphasize the scale and consistency of this. 7 mothers.
It's a small number.
It's an incredibly small, manageable number. And they focused on one spiritual quality per week. Unity, truthfulness, patience. This level of focus is not overwhelming. It allows for deep, measurable application. It moves these abstract ideas into concrete daily practice.
And it's that small, focused effort done consistently that generates real behavioral change.
It creates a kind of spiritual laboratory. They study the quality. That's the study. They try to cultivate it at home all week. That's the action. And then they come back and report on their successes and struggles. That's the reflection.
And that reflection part is so crucial, isn't it? It allows for collective learning, for mutual encouragement. You realize that your struggle with, say, patience isn't just your personal failing, it's a shared human challenge.
Exactly. And the tangible outcomes were immediate. They were observable, not just in their own personal growth, but in their children and in their homes. The letter says they began to witness transformation, not only in their children, but gradually in their entire families. That validates the whole approach. Spiritual transformation isn't compartmentalized. It just spills over into every aspect of life.
I think we need to dwell on that for a second, that generational and family impact. When a mother who is so often the central pillar of the home changes how she responds to stress or interacts with her spouse or corrects her kids, that capacity immediately ripples out. It doesn't just improve the mother, it raises the spiritual climate of the entire household. It's probably the most efficient delivery mechanism for social change there is.
And that transformation It generates its own momentum. The report notes, as the mothers experienced transformation in their families, a natural desire to extend it to others arose.
This is the moment.
This is the moment they fully transition from participants to protagonists.
Yeah.
They aren't reaching out because an institution told them to. They're reaching out because their own profound experience demands that they share it. The spring of action is now internal.
And this internal drive immediately translates into practical, community-focused goals. They consulted together and came to the conclusion that if all the kids in the neighborhood had access to these activities, problems like bullying could be reduced.
That is an incredible leap from personal spiritual growth straight to social policy.
They didn't need a government grant or a social scientist to tell them what the neighborhood needed.
No, they just observed the positive changes in their own children, far less fighting, more virtue, and they immediately extrapolated that solution to a widespread social problem like bullying, which is a massive issue in schools everywhere.
This collective conclusion just shows that spiritual insight is directly translatable into practical social action. They're moving from personal transformation to neighborhood transformation, and they're using spiritual education as the direct primary tool for that change.
They've defined the problem, a lack of moral education, and they now have the solution, the institute process.
And this is the stage where that small nucleus moves definitively into organized community service, organizing festivals to introduce more people to the program.
And here we see that final crucial step in capacity building, true, sustainable ownership. The letter makes a point of contrasting this new effort with the past to show just how much growth there was.
The distinction is so stark, it says. Unlike the first festival, which had been organized by the pioneers, this time the mothers took ownership of the entire process, from invitations and planning to execution and accompaniment of new families.
And that contrast is the proof of concept for the entire institute framework, isn't it?
Yeah. It is. It means the mothers are no longer dependent on external expertise or even funding. They have the intellectual capacity, the spiritual capacity, and the self-confidence to manage the whole thing themselves.
The pioneers showed them how to do it once.
And now the protagonists own the process forever. That's genuine, self-sustaining community growth right there.
And this confidence allowed them to scale up their efforts in a major way, leading to a big summer event. The capacity built by those 7 consistent mothers let them host a massive camp that summer.
Let me get the numbers. This past summer, the families organized a week-long children's camp with over 80 children and 45 volunteers, teachers, and local parents.
80 children and 45 adults. That is exponential growth from that initial little group.
When you think about the logistics and the collaboration needed to organize a week-long camp for over 120 people, you realize the incredible management and organizational capacity that was built in this small group of women in a pretty short time.
And the philosophy behind the camp is what really captures the spirit of the faith. One of the mothers is quoted, and she describes the camp as being inspired by the Baha'i teachings, which emphasize the importance of both moral and spiritual education alongside arts, sciences, trades, and professions, embracing a philosophy that sees every child as full of untapped potential.
That one quote is a perfect summary of the Baha'i philosophy of education.
It is.
It's not just about virtue classes, it's about preparing children for life, holistically. Integrating moral development with practical skills, with intellectual pursuits, preparing them to contribute to society through arts or sciences or trades.
This is why the program resonated so deeply. It addressed the practical, outward-looking hope of parents that their kids succeed in life, but it did it through spiritual and moral means.
And that camp became a highly effective extension of it, a showcase of the community's vitality. It ended with a gathering to share experiences, introduce new families to the institute process, and invite them to join.
And the quantitative result, the clearest measure of success you can have. As a result, 3 new children's classes formed this fall.
That confirms the whole cycle: study, action, reflection, service. It leads directly to the multiplication of spaces for learning. The success is validated because the activity has become self-generating within that receptive population.
They built a system that organically reproduces itself.
But the realization deepens even further. As these families got into the habit of daily prayer and reflecting on the changes, they grasped the core metaphysical truth of it all. The Word of God was the animating force behind the transformation.
And this spiritual realization is the final piece of true consolidation. They understand their success wasn't just because of good planning or friendly volunteers. It was due to the systemic application of divine teachings. And that realization solidifies their commitment to the Institute process, because now they understand it's a spiritual system that taps into a power greater than just human effort.
And that profound understanding then compels them to reach out more intentionally to other families.
The letter then gives this beautiful summary of the overall health of the neighborhood. It's a picture of systemic, enduring change.
It says that spaces are multiplying through which Baha'u'llah's revelation is being applied by more and more souls for the betterment of their neighborhood. And it highlights that family camps are becoming an environment where bonds of love and unity are strengthened and generational gaps are bridged through meaningful interactions.
That detail about bridging generational gaps is so interesting. The activity isn't just for the kids, it's healing structural social issues within the family unit itself.
The joint effort to serve, planning the camp, the shared reflection, it ensures that spiritual values are passed down and discussed across ages. It fortifies the family.
And it's expanding beyond just their own center. The report notes the mothers are now collaborating with local elementary schools to expand the reach of the Institute.
That's a huge indicator of success and influence. When you move the effort from your neighborhood center and your homes into established public spaces like elementary schools, it means the community's efforts have gained real acceptance and recognition from the broader civic structure.
The local institutions, the schools, now see the value in what they're doing and are actively partnering with them.
And the summary reinforces that core goal. It says, families labor together to extend the reach of the Word of God to many souls, while also ensuring that the system of the Institute gains in strength.
So they're focused on outreach and on strengthening the backbone at the same time. They're building capacity while they're expanding. It's brilliant. And this amazing success story brings us to the final strategic section, where the National Spiritual Assembly pivots from sharing this triumph to posing the critical forward-looking challenge for all of us.
They observe the overall environment that comes from this kind of effort, saying, as Baha'u'llah's revelation continues to find expression in the lives of more and more families, a spirit of love, devotion, generosity, and service is emerging.
And that's the broader significance, right? The Edmonds example is proof that the revelation is actively creating a new spiritual reality in family life. That spirit of service and generosity, it's not just a temporary emotion. It is a predictable, sustainable outcome of disciplined participation in that cycle of study, action, and reflection.
But the NSA, seeing this beautiful success at the micro level, immediately shifts the perspective to the macro level challenge of the 9-year plan. They don't let anyone rest on their laurels.
No, they ask the crucial strategic question, which should be a wake-up call for every single cluster, they ask. A key question that remains is how the process can extend to thousands of people in the neighborhood and what arrangements will be required to sustain and support it.
That is the fundamental bottleneck in any rapidly growing movement, isn't it? They've successfully gone from a handful of pioneers to dozens of engaged families. But the next scale shift, from dozens to thousands of people actively involved, that's a completely different kind of operational problem.
It requires institutional maturation. The current arrangements, which rely heavily on that initial nucleus and the amazing effort of those 7 mothers, they won't scale linearly. You can't just multiply the mothers by 10.
No.
New arrangements, and that means new structures, new training capacity, better resource distribution, more efficient institutional support. All of that is going to be required to handle exponential growth.
I mean, if you just think about the logistics, scaling to thousands means moving beyond just recruiting new kids for a class. It means mass generating tutors. It means coordinating with 20 or 30 different schools. It means managing dozens and dozens of classes and making sure the quality of the education doesn't get diluted as the numbers grow.
It becomes a major organizational undertaking.
So the challenge they're posing here at the Feast of Masá'il, the Feast of Questions, it's an invitation for the whole Baha'i community to think deeply about system building and expansion capacity. It's asking us to look at these beautiful small successes and immediately start planning for the massive, complex success that we believe is promised.
And relating this to being a Baha'i right now, the message is crystal clear. We can't become complacent with small-scale success, no matter how profoundly transformative it feels. We have to use that success as the foundation to engineer the systemic evolution needed for that exponential growth.
We need to become as strategic about our administrative structures as the Edmonds mothers were about their English class pivot.
And that ties right back to the main rules of the 9-year plan, which is all about widespread global expansion and establishing these new patterns of community life. The Edmonds report shows us how that pattern gets established, through empowered, diverse, local families becoming protagonists. The critical question that remains is how fast and how far can that pattern be extended and sustained?
The letter then concludes with this final note of encouragement. It says, "Dear friends, we hope that this report will inform and inspire your own efforts in advancing the aims of the 9-year plan. Be assured of our abiding love and unceasing prayers on your behalf."
And that's a personal call to action. The report isn't just news or a nice story. It's a tool for strategic planning. It informs the community about best practices, especially the power of families as protagonists, and it inspires them to go and implement these models in their own clusters. It clearly says that the work of advancing the 9-year plan is fundamentally about empowering families in neighborhoods, meeting their immediate needs, and inviting them into this systematic, transformative spiritual framework.
So after all that, what does this all mean? The journey of the Edmonds neighborhood, it started with a shared concern over children's education among these diverse families, Chinese, Indian, Colombian, Mexican. And it led to 7 mothers repurposing a formal curriculum, Rui Book 3, to take ownership of their community's spiritual education. It's just a powerful testament to the Institute process.
It is.
It means that the power to build society is released most effectively when local families feel empowered to become protagonists. And when the Institute structure stays responsive and adaptive to their immediate needs, it proves that spiritual development is the most practical form of community service.
And, the case of Edmonds shows us that the path to reaching thousands, it doesn't start with some big media campaign or abstract planning. It starts with the consistent, loving action of a small group. In this case, 7 mothers reflecting on just one spiritual quality per week. So the question for all of us, for you listening as learners and participants, is this. If such profound, measurable social and spiritual transformation can come from the dedicated local action of just a handful of families, how quickly could our society transform if we all identified our local receptive population and committed to that level of consistent, loving service? Consider how the smallest unit of consistent spiritual activity can be the ultimate engine for large-scale, sustainable social change. The mystery of divine will is often revealed through the practical, dedicated service of ordinary people working within a clear framework.
That is a profound but also a very practical thought to take with us as we move forward in the 9-year plan.
It connects the abstract right to the actionable.
Well, that closes out our deep dive into the Feast of Masá'il 2025 letter. We really hope this analysis has not only informed you about the specifics of this incredible success story, but has also inspired your own efforts wherever you are in the world. If you found this level of detail helpful, please make sure you subscribe, like, comment, and share this deep dive. And a huge thank you to all of our current subscribers. Your support really does fuel this channel and lets us dedicate the time we need for this kind of in-depth exploration. If you aren't subscribed yet, we'd love for you to consider joining us. And finally, if you want early access to content and special deep dives, you might consider becoming a member. We thank all of our current members. Your contribution really helps the channel grow and make sure we can keep providing this kind of synthesis and analysis. Join us next time for more deep dives into the source material that is shaping the future. Until then, take care.